I have a confession. I knew when I announced that we were going to be starting Tales of Berseria tonight, and in my head, after everything we've been doing, streaming the Tales series so far, I was conceptually excited for this in the abstract. I knew it was going to be fun to dig into it after doing Tales of Zestiria and its DLC, but oh man, I booted up Tales of Berseria on my PS5. I heard the music again on the game's just title screen in my PS5 menu even before you open the game. Then I opened the game up and watched the introductory anime movie with the song and the overview of the game that is so characteristic of Bandai Namco's Tales games and the way they tell stories. And watching that video got me so viscerally excited in my bones because it called back so much of what got me really interested in this game back when it first launched in 2017, and it gave me a renewed and immediate certainty that, especially since we just spent so much time in Tales of Zestiria, we're going to get a whole new palette of really cool experiences out of this. That's all by way of saying I am very excited to welcome you to a Friday edition of Tales of Praxis. I'm your host, Aaron Suduko, the founder of WithATerribleFate.com, your first and final source for all the best and richest literary studies of your favorite video games. Tales of Praxis is a streaming and analytical article series that I started for the publication a few months ago. I'm a philosopher of video game storytelling, been doing that and also running the publication With a Terrible Fate for the better part of a decade at this point. And the Tales series was a big part of what got me interested in video games, specifically as a storytelling medium, all the way back when I first discovered video games as a kid. My way into that specifically was with Tales of Symphonia. And so after I'd been doing so much work in the theory and study of video game stories, to see that Bandai Namco was finally doing a remastered version of Tales of Symphonia, that was the perfect motivation for me to finally decide to take a big breath and dive as deep as I've ever dove back into the series that in many ways made me the gamer and thinker and also just person I am today, and celebrate that and try to understand from the inside what it is about these games that make them so meaningful, not just to me, but also to these huge and diverse communities of fans. Fans, including our wonderful regular, I guess it's fair to say now, on the stream, Grail Z5. Grail, my friend, welcome back. Glad to have you. You weren't that late. I was just doing the opening spiel to kick things off. Grail can vouch for the series better than I because he's a little more impartial. But we started with Tales of Symphonia Remastered based on that initial motivation of mine. It was With a Terrible Fate's first foray into streaming. We did a wonderful adventure through Symphonia, followed by Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World. And then after that, inspired to think about similar duologies, which is to say pairs of related stories in the Tales series, I decided to look at Tales of Zestiria in concert with Tales of Berseria, which is a prequel released a couple of years later. So we just, within the last week or two, finished first the base game of Tales of Zestiria, and then on Wednesday we wrapped on its DLC, Alisha's Story, which followed up on the conclusion of Zestiria, and now we're going to go into the past to see a different face of this world in Tales of Berseria. Along the way, I've also been playing a few more of the Tales games in the background, not streamed. So I've done Tales of the Abyss and written a study on that, which you can check out on WithATerribleFate.com, and also Tales of Destiny. And I am just grinding through the end of Tales of Vesperia, with more studies on the way, especially as I wrap up that playthrough of Vesperia and turn my attention more to publication again, which will be really great. I'm so excited for Berseria, and I had just a few thoughts on that to kind of get us grounded as we dive into this. First, I talk about this every now and then on the stream, but not consistently. And since we're diving into the beginning of a playthrough of a brand new Tales game, brand new to this stream, this was released in 2017, I wanted to remind everyone why the series, that is the series of streaming and analytical articles, is called Tales of Praxis. Of course, it's a play on Tales of, which is the name of Namco's series. But I also chose the word praxis, which is typically used in like theoretical and philosophical discussions as distinctive from theory. So you have theory, which is more of the abstract consideration of ideas and the nature of things, and praxis as in the practice of those ideas or the practical application or what it is that you actually do with them. And I wanted to call this Tales of Praxis because even before we started diving into these games, I had this feeling that one of the things that has really spoken to me about them through the years, and that I wanted to especially consider as we did a deep dive and close readings into and of them, was this idea that even though they're not the most meta games or choice heavy games in terms of the decisions made by a player radically influencing narrative outcomes like you would get in a Mass Effect or a Dishonored or something like that, I've always felt as though the Tales games have a really deft way of weaving your activity as the player into their stories and the themes, so that by the time the credits roll, you're left in the position to ask yourself pretty pointed questions about, okay, what did I just do in that game? And how does everything it said about its messages and its themes actually apply to my activity and interest in these games as a player? Oh yeah, no, Theory and Praxis are indeed blades in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Grail, but no, that's those names are allusions to the broader distinction, which comes from critical theory and various parts of philosophy, not the other way around. But that's funny. Yeah, and so I've spoken about this idea of how it kind of applies in various ways in the games, off and on. I'm thinking I'll write a few more overt articles on it, but just to give you a few examples of ways in which this idea of praxis and reflecting on the player's actions has come up in some of the games that we've considered so far. You can think of it like an easy way into it, just considering the nature of relationships and what brings people closer together or further apart and unlocks different possibilities for things that they can do in that relationship. That's part and parcel of everything the player does in Tales of Symphonia, where it's very easy to stumble into unexpected relationships with more depth than you thought there would be, or accidentally miss out on developing relationships that you were trying to. That's the article I'm working on right now, is actually how I was trying to prioritize the relationship with Kratos in our streamed playthrough of that game, and I accidentally ended up falling into Regal being Lloyd's best friend, and that actually gave me a lot to reflect on as a player and how I've developed over the years, and why that might be the case that I kind of unconsciously leaned into Regal as opposed to Kratos in a cool way. You get, of course, in something like Dawn of the New World, with the idea of the player actually being able to interpret and decide the nature of her avatar, Emil, and then ultimately Ratatosk, and evaluate the nature of whether, at the end of the day, Ratatosk has evolved to be something more sympathetic as a human, or if he really is just a summon spirit bent on eradicating humans from the world. I wrote about it in my article on Tales of the Abyss, which I guess I can also link in the chat while we're vamping. This idea that if you interpret Tales of the Abyss as it invites you to do through the lens of a particular flavor of Jewish mysticism called Lurianic Kabbalah, you can actually derive a pretty specific role of the player, basically the animating light, or what's called in Hebrew the kav, which emanates from kind of the primordial divine force that makes the universe possible, and through that animated force, which is the player, actually makes it possible for the characters within this world to rectify the world and experience a specific kind of moral redemption through it. And we could go on and on with examples here, but I think those are good ones to kind of get a sense for how the player can act in the world in different ways. And then, of course, most recently, we talked about this at the end of the Zestiria stream and then its DLC stream, the idea that Zestiria calls on its player to do really active and close reading of the world in order to not only understand, but analyze and reconsider the concepts that make possible an understanding of our place in the world and our ability to act as well-reasoned and principled individuals in the way that the characters also do by the end of the game. So many things interest me about these games. I love them for a wide variety of reasons, but most of my work in the philosophy of video game storytelling focuses on player-avatar relationships. And a big part, I think, of what has called me to these games over and over again is what they say about the player's activity in it and how that can actually bleed out into how you think about your role in life and the kind of person you want to be. So that's been kind of an undercurrent of what we've been exploring throughout Tales of Praxis so far, and I'm definitely confident that we'll continue to bring it out in probably some more explicit ways as we go on here. Grail, I'm going to catch up on your messages real quick, and I'm going to be more engaged once I'm done with my intro spiel here. Yeah, Grail, for those who are tuning in but are not familiar from our previous conversations, is going to be doing a pretty intense challenge run of Berseria and has already started that, while we're doing a much more story-focused, not as gameplay-intense run. So especially as Grail stays with the stream and shares the experiences from that other kind of playthrough, we might have some interesting like dueling perspectives on part of the game, which will also hopefully add some good flavor to this playthrough that we're going to be embarking on this evening. Oh, and even better, Grail is skipping the story and focusing just on the gameplay. So that'll be a fun experience for you, I hope, Grail. So that'll really give you the best of both worlds, or two different worlds at least. I don't know if that other world of yours is what I would call the best of anything, but to each his own, as we know. That's a bit of background on what Tales of Praxis is and what inspired me to do it. In terms of setting context for Tales of Berseria, we've talked to death, hopefully, what we think about our experience with Tales of Zestiria, followed up by its DLC, Alisha's story. And even though I've kind of been pitching this whole time that it's going to be fun to think of these games in conversation with one another, because Tales of Berseria is, it turns out, a prequel to Tales of Zestiria. As we're starting out on Berseria, I actually want to kind of challenge us to put everything that we just talked about and learned from Zestiria out of our heads and not do a lot of talking and recap of, okay, this is what I thought about this part of Zestiria. Let's see how that's picked up on in Berseria. And the reason that I do that is not to say that they're unrelated games. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, that's not the point of what we're doing, and that's not the point of these games. But I think it's really easy with games that are set up as a kind of sequel to just automatically think of them as an extension of the same story and same messages and same themes as the game that came before it. And that's fine. That's one way to think about it. But especially when stories are released as independent entities, I think it can be much more valuable and interesting to look at them as works of art and fictions on their own terms first, because each one, of course, does have a beginning, a middle, an end, different characters, different lessons that are taught, and things that they have to say. And if you don't start out just seeing it in its own light, it can then be much harder to, with any level of precision and rigor, ask yourself, how are these two games in conversation with one another? Because if you don't know what they're saying on their own terms, it's hard to have a sense of what two things are in conversation at all. And then you can lump them together, but any kind of real interaction that they're going to have and the kind of interesting thematic insight you might get where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts kind of comes out in the wash and gets lost along the way. So I want to invite us, with the understanding that this ultimately will be deeply related to Zestiria, to just approach this as a kind of blank canvas, as white as the background to this opening screen, if you will indulge me in that. I think it's warranted in this kind of sequel or follow-up also, because remember, another big part of why we're doing Tales of Praxis is because I think there's a lot of value in playing through a video game series of related stories in quick succession so that you can hold them all in your mind and see not just what they're saying and what they're trying to do, but also kind of what the overall storytelling language of the series is, and how even games that don't take place in the very same fictional world might be in conversation with one another. Like, for example, many of the connections we've drawn between things like Tales of Destiny, Tales of Zestiria, Tales of Symphonia, all of these different games over a course of streaming the various games and seeing little moments that remind us of things in other games. And in that broader context of the Tales series, keep in mind, this is a series that knows how to do very direct extensions through a named sequel. We have things with just the number 2 attached to them, like Tales of Destiny 2, Tales of Xillia 2. And then we also have things that, yeah, they take place in the same fictional world, but they're named in different ways. Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World is not Tales of Symphonia 2. And Tales of Berseria, that doesn't even have the word Zestiria in it. And that might seem like a small and pedantic difference, but I think it actually does a really good job of underscoring the fact that these games that are a different kind of sequel are kind of signaling from the get-go that they're more radically different and disjunct from the game that preceded them. And that's kind of the point of how they're trying to have a conversation with that previous game. Think back to some of the things that we were talking about when we were playing Dawn of the New World. If you sat in on any of that, or if you've watched any of the VODs, they're all up on YouTube. A big part of what was really interesting about that playthrough was the idea that we had just played through Tales of Symphonia. We all took a deep breath and said, okay, we're familiar with this. Maybe we played it when it first came out as kids and we didn't really enjoy it. But let's recognize from the get-go that it's going to be a very different game, because we know that. And let's ask ourselves, what are those differences trying to say about Tales of Symphonia, or about the broader duology of stories, and why might it actually be a thoughtful and deliberate thing that is being introduced in Dawn of the New World that is not the same thing as you got in Tales of Symphonia. You get more overt international, political, even insurgent struggles in Dawn of the New World, whereas a lot of that just was not on the radar for the majority of Tales of Symphonia, barring smaller conflicts between like the church and state in Tethe'ala, but those are much more localized things that didn't take up as much of the game. You might think that's a great way of the game showing, especially following up on a world-saving and world-changing game like Tales of Symphonia. Look, just because the world is saved, that doesn't mean that society is saved. In fact, once you bring people with different ideologies from literally, in the case of Tales of Symphonia, different worlds together, you're going to get a lot of conflict that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, because those people were previously separated and in different universes relative to one another. And therefore, it can take a lot of work to actually get people to understand and be in harmony with one another, even after you make that interaction possible. So showing that something that Tales of Symphonia in some ways represented as a one-step process to world peace and harmony is actually more of a two-step process. Think too about, we talked often about the difference between the network of relationships between all the various 9 party members in Tales of Symphonia versus the much more intimate and singular one-on-one relationship between Emil and Marta in Dawn of the New World, right? I think that's a big part of why it can be a jarring adjustment for people to go into Dawn of the New World if they're expecting something that'll give them the same party feelings as Tales of Symphonia, because it's a different kind of party, right? To say nothing of the fact that, in contrast with the relatively monolithic ending of Tales of Symphonia, in Dawn of the New World, you get 3 very different endings that are made possible by player choices. That can be a big learning curve and something that's hard to adapt to, right? But if you take a step back and ask, why might that be the case relative to what was happening in Tales of Symphonia, you might say something like, well, it turns out there's an enormous burden and responsibility when you think of the people who know you best and have intimate, direct relationships with you, to actually not just see you, but interpret you in certain ways and say, hey, this is how I understand you to be, because those interpretations can actually empower someone to be a better version of themselves, or redeem them if they see themselves as a sinner or someone who's done something wrong, or contrary-wise, can damn them into becoming a villain, right? That's only possible once discrimination makes way for the possibility of trust. In Tales of Symphonia, we see a world that is so separated to the point of, half-elves and elves and human, not only not having a lot of respect for one another, but also having a lot of infighting and resentment and stratification, to the point that Mythos seeks out an age of lifeless beings with no distinctions, to a conclusion that makes possible people actually bearing witness to one another, but in a similar light to what we were saying about society needing a lot of work even after interaction becomes possible, that is kind of recreated and reenacted on a more intimate and singular scale as well, which is exactly what we see when we get the chance to bear witness to those more isolated, maybe romantic, maybe simply intimate relationships between characters like Emil and Marta, and indeed the player and our perception of Emil and Ratatosk in a way that shapes the world differently than Symphonia, but in a way that is only possible because of Symphonia. That's not to say this is going to suddenly turn into a Dawn of the New World stream. That's just a quick, relatively succinct case study to point out that I think the Tales team certainly knows what they're doing when it comes to storytelling, and when they're thoughtful enough to extend a series of games and stories with another game that looks like a sequel but is not quite a sequel, it's worth paying attention to why that's the case and what that might shed light on with regard to our overall understanding of that little pocket of the series. So I'd love for us to dig into Berseria in the same way. I think we'll be able to take a plethora of similarly interesting and very cool insights away from it, not just in terms of this game, but also in terms of its relationship to Zestiria, and also with regard to what the Tales series as a whole is trying to do with its storytelling. That's all I wanted to say by way of kickoff. I am excited to dive in. Before we start the game, I will catch up on messages real quick so we can set forth together and get to a more social book club of a stream together. Boy, y'all have been active while I was giving a little mini lecture. Yes, Grail, I will be counting on you for tips for better gameplay. Thank you. If you're watching the stream and don't know me that well, I think a lot about games, but I am also the first to admit I am not that great at the mechanics of playing them, so I rely on friends like Grail to give me those fabulous gameplay tips, and we work through that together, which will be great. Pink Moon Echo, welcome. Great to see new fresh blood in the stream. If you've been watching for the past few minutes, you probably already understand this is a little different breed than the typical stream, but we love games for their storytelling. We think they're amazing works of art and worth doing these kinds of close readings. The stream is basically the opportunity to do that live with a series of great game stories. So hopefully you'll stick around and see what that's all about. But welcome, yes. Oh, Grail, you don't threaten me with a good time if you're thinking this is a 6-page essay already. This was literally, and I don't say this to brag, this is just like get inside the head for being Aaron Sudoku. Like, I wanted to put together some thoughts to orient myself as much as anything, so I literally wrote down like maybe like 4 paragraphs of notes in the 10 minutes before the stream. Actually, as I say that, 4 paragraphs sounds like a lot. I had it as less in my head, but hopefully it's worthwhile. I wanted to give the grounding because I think it's useful for us to get into a whole new game, which will probably occupy us for at least 60 hours, looking at how long it took me last time, on the same page. So I'm excited about that. All right, my friends. I think I'm sufficiently caught up. Thank you for bearing with me. I will welcome you again, wish you a happy Friday night, and without any further ado, let's dive into this. I guess the last thing I'll say, and this is a very brief comment, but in terms of my lasting impressions from Berseria from the first and only time I played it, which was when it came out in 2017, I remember being really impressed and touched by this game because it felt like the most self-consciously artistic and kind of cinematic Tales game of all of those which I'd played up to that point. And I don't want to say more than that because I don't want to color people's perceptions of it going into it, but I'll call out some of those moments that I'm talking about as we go through it. And if you've played it already, maybe you already have an intuitive sense of what I mean, because I think the game is pretty iconic in Tales circles for that reason. I do have the file still from my first playthrough, but honestly, part of what I've been enjoying about the cadence of the streamed playthroughs is just starting from scratch and having that fresh file experience with everyone. So I think we're just going to go with a New Game Plus and take it from Jump Street. Let's do this. I will be playing on normal, which has become my norm, no pun intended, on the stream. If I were playing on my own, I would do hard, and it would take probably 1.5 times as long, and I would get more frustrated but feel more fulfilled ultimately. But maybe we'll transition to that eventually. I just don't feel like that is as copacetic for the kind of stream and the focus that we're going for on these. But we'll see how things evolve. It's early days still. Yeah, you would know, wouldn't you, Grail? Boy, this actually is giving me vivid flashbacks to the opening scene of Dawn of the New World. So I'm glad I spent all of that time talking about it.
You hide here, Velvet. I'm going back to help Celica.
I'm so scared. Arthur, please.
You'll be just fine with these. Celica enchanted them herself. They'll give you the courage you need to survive.
They will.
Sure they will. Now, have I ever lied to you?
That's first-person perspective. It's pretty unusual for these games.
It's scary, but don't give in to fear. Don't despair, no matter what.
I won't. I promise. After all, I'm Laffy's older sister, and your student.
Oh. There's something so scary and claustrophobic about just the combination of color and camera angle and the perspective of children feeling so lost and helpless. I don't think we've played any other Tales games so far, and there are others that do this, that start from the perspective of kids in that way. Yeah, really contrast rich, isn't it, Grail?
On that day, the world began to change.
And look at the use of color. It's mostly monochrome except for her claw.
Men and beasts possessed by evil spirits, hunting and killing anyone they could. But even in the depths of despair, only two things matter to me. The taste of blood-soaked flesh, and revenge upon one man.
Laffy, time to wake up. Okay. Morning. I told you to stop calling me Luffy. I'm not a little kid anymore.
Grumble, grumble, huh? You must be feeling good. Bit of a fever, I'm afraid. At least the new medicine's supposed to come today. Until then, you stay in bed, got it?
What? Aw, but I wanted to go to the Cape.
Sorry, you'll have to wait.
Can I at least read a book?
Don't trouble your sister, Laphicet.
I didn't mean to.
Arthur, done chopping firewood?
Yeah, enough to last through winter. But there's something else I need to take care of. Sorry, but medicine money will have to wait a bit.
I can earn it myself then. Bring down a few prickle boars, and I'll have plenty to offer in trade.
On your own?
Arthur's first maxim. Plans must be solid and reactions flexible.
All right. I shouldn't doubt my students' abilities. Sorry to put you in a spot.
Reminds me of the Dwarven Vows a little bit from Symphonia.
Whoa, hey! What's everyone apologizing for? We're a family, right?
Right. I'll see you later.
I whipped up some porridge for you, okay? Be back by evening.
Thank you. Be careful, Velvet.
Yeah, also just a small thing to already notice about that introduction being what I would call, in a certain sense, more literary than some other games you might have played in JRPGs. The way it opens up in medias res, the literary term for stuff like what the Odyssey does in terms of starting in the middle of the story or a later point and then moving back to an earlier point in the narrative, where we've seen how Velvet goes from promising not to give in to despair to being bound in the depths of despair in a prison. And now with that limited understanding, but more understanding than what Velvet has now, we're being put in her shoes to take her as an avatar and explore, presumably, the events that lead up to what we just bore witness to in a non-interactive way.
Rest up, all right?
Don't forget to take some gels with you. You know, you're careless sometimes.
I'll be fine. You just make sure.
Don't worry about me. I'll be in bed resting.
You better be. Keep warm, and no going outside.
Sheesh, you don't trust me at all. It'll get dark if you don't leave soon.
It's interesting, too, because, again, from that opening scene, we've already seen how kind of, I guess you could say, feral she becomes, which is reflected in her voice acting, right? Like when she was talking about seeking revenge on one man in that scene in the prison, like there was a clear grit to her voice. And now, almost in contrast to that, I feel like the voice actress, whose name I should look up because I'm sure we'll be talking about her a decent amount, is putting on almost like a Disney princess affectation to the voice. Like it sounds almost happier than real life has any business being, which is an speaking of contrast, right? We don't just have color contrast. We have a lot of tonal contrast just in the few minutes here. Yeah, speaking of contrast, great minds think alike, I guess, huh, Grail? All right, and Aaron's going to have to learn a whole different button mapping for all of the same map navigation functions that we were working through in the last game. We can do it. All right.
If I'm on the hunt for prickle boars, I'd better try the tranquil woods outside of town. This is for Laufey's medicine, so I can't mess this up.
Beside a grave marker for Arthur and Celica's unborn child, and the gravestones of Velvet's parents and her sister Celica. Got it. So her sister, Velvet's sister, who is deceased, was Arthur's wife, it sounds like, and they had a stillborn child, or otherwise unborn child. Boy, talk about packing a lot of exposition into one little field description. This little life will spread its wings and soar through the skies. Christina Valenzuela. Thank you, Grail. Do you know her from anything else? Is she a voice actress I ought to know? Or did you just look up the name? That's also disappointing to me because I have a lot of respect for Valenzuela, and I'm going to look forward to calling her out throughout this playthrough, but I'm going to preemptively apologize because I can already see myself accidentally calling her Christina Venezuela like a million times, so I apologize, Ms. Valenzuela. I know this is basically a meme at this point, but especially in this setup, especially for a game like this, I just want to, I think part of why I'm taking it so slow is I just have this impulse to stay in the happy little quiet village at the start of a 60-hour JRPG for as long as I can before everything goes to hell. Like the village at the start of Chrono Trigger. That's a great example of that too. I don't want to get on Mr. Bones' wild ride. Yeah, I'll have to look up her IMDb after this, Gru. The cat's named Othello. That's the biggest clue that this is a literary game so far. I don't care about any of the other more technical stuff. A cat named Othello, that's all I need. Talking to someone whom others don't see. That sounds familiar from the things we've been streaming lately. Wait, what, Grail? What are you saying should we set up? I didn't understand that message.
Ever since the opening 7 years ago, this world's really gone crazy. Famine, freezing weather, and worst of all, this demon blight that's turning people into monsters.
I can't believe that people can really turn into those things. It's a nightmare.
Does no one know what causes demon blight? Or how to heal it?
No. What we do know is that when people turn into those monsters, I mean, demons, they gain incredible strength and attack humans on sight.
Whoever named it the opening named it right. It's like someone opened a portal directly to hell.
Come to think of it, Celica died during the opening, didn't she? It might be a good thing she died when she did. She didn't have to suffer through all of this.
It's good that my sister died? How can you say that?
Sorry. I didn't mean it that way.
You're a real idiot, you know that?
Sorry about him, Velvet.
Just like a timer for some particular activity in the game, Grail, or do you mean just for our overall playthrough? I do know the kind of timer you're talking about. I just I wasn't sure what you meant it in reference to. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Right, so I guess it sounds like because we saw 2 time frames in the opening scene, one of which was prior to this and one of which was after this. So I guess the one where Velvet and Laphicet were really young, it sounds like was the opening, which we just learned was also when Velvet's sister died. And then we saw the much darker shade of Velvet which appeared to be in the future relative to this. And now here I am stuck in the middle with you. Oh, is Abal the name of this village? Is that what? That's what I was missing from your message.
Dinner in a while. There's been so much going on. And the village always has him out hunting. Maybe he's just worn out? That does it. I'll cook him up some prickle boar stew, just like Celica taught me. That ought to pick him right up. A healthy portion of nourishing meat cures fevers and weariness alike.
We see the skits continuing to become more artistic and elaborate, which is always the case in successive games.
Hey, Velvet. Is Laphicet feeling better? No, not yet. He needs a little more rest, I think. Aw, too bad. Tell him I'm looking forward to hunting beetles with him again when he's better. Right, got it. Laphicet's illness sure is persistent. Yeah, that fever still keeps coming back, like clockwork. The medicine always helps a little bit, but still, that sounds terrible. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Thanks, but we'll be fine. At least we've got Arthur to take care of anything that needs muscle. And before he came, Celica raised me and Laffy all by herself. So now I have to do my best too.
You sound just like your sister. That optimism must run in the family.
I do? That's nice of you to say.
You're so optimistic and happy-go-lucky, Velvet. I'm sure those will be your defining characteristics for the entirety of this 60-hour JRPG. Yeah, Grail, we could do it like an homage to Majora's Mask, like a 3-day clock countdown. When will the final day be for this village?
Probably stock up on a few things before I go into the forest. I don't have a lot of money to spare, but like Arthur always says, battles are won and lost with the preparations made before the first strike.
Just really optimistic and happy-go-lucky revenge, Grail. I feel like that's a trope. There are definitely... Well, are there happy-minded revenge seekers? We gotta find an example of that now that we're riffing on it. I guess Savid was kind of that way in Zestiria, right? Like, I would call him relatively optimistic and happy-go-lucky, but he was definitely on a revenge quest. Yes, cats. Noted. Pink Moon Echo, great example. I love that. We've got store levels again. That's consistent with Zestiria. Oh, we only have 200 gold. I'm used to being in a stage in a JRPG where I can afford things. I guess one more wouldn't hurt. Sure, why not? All right, so she's 16. We have a reference in the text on how old she is right now. Especially in a game where we're juggling a couple of time frames. It always helps me to keep actual age in mind. Which the Tales games, like, I've been talking about this since Symphonia. It's frustrating to me that, like, on their status pages or something, they don't just have a line to remind you what their age is, because I feel like it is oftentimes really useful to remember how old they're supposed to be, because they do, like, they have specific ages, and in many of the games they will oftentimes talk about them, but they talk about them in really throwaway references, and it can be hard to find just on a whim if you forget, like, oh yeah, I don't know how old, like, Raven is, or is Colette the same age as Lloyd? Like, questions like that can sometimes be hard to answer. You don't think Zavid qualifies as a happy revenge seeker, Grail? I feel like that would be right on the money. Good. We have quick saves to take advantage of, too. I'm definitely going to keep that in mind after the number of times it saved us in Zestiria. Yes, back in the days of booklets. Exactly. Now we're just on our own. I guess relegated to the wiki, right? I mean, that's the reality of things now. You kind of have to just punt to the internet for a lot of that stuff you would get in official material back in the day. So it sounds like there is some kind of invisible spirit entity in the midst of Velvet and Laphicet and Arthur. And interestingly, in contrast to Zestiria, where we had a whole framework for the world and what was going on set up from the get-go, we have almost the opposite, where people are transforming into demons, but no one knows why the hell that's going on. The other thing I keep meaning to call out is because Grail, it was so fitting, I guess, for you to mention this on the Zestiria stream, because we were talking about, oh, well, how do demons relate to this world? Because they're just one or two throwaway references to it. Whereas now we're thrown into a world where they're explicitly from the get-go talking about demons. So very kind of deliberately different nomenclature there, one might think.
The demon blight is a punishment sent to us by the Empyreans for forgetting the old prayers.
Who are the Empyreans?
The 4 Empyreans created the world. The one Empyrean shall bring it to peace. Be afraid. When contradiction permeates this world, the time of suppression will be upon us.
Are you okay? Do you want me to take you home?
No! Don't treat me like a child!
All right, then.
Oh, it's you, Velvet. If you're going to the Cape, take care.
Don't fall into the Shrine of Tranquility, right? I know. I'm not a kid.
Of course, of course. You're 13 now, aren't you?
I'm 16.
When contradiction permeates the world, the time of suppression will be upon us. How's that for an interesting and cryptic omen to kick off a story? I love it. Yeah, I'm sure there are other examples too, Grail, but I think what we're hitting up against is the fact that it is not a very common character type, to be sure. Oh, I can turn it up a bit. There, I cranked it up a skosh. Let me know if I overcorrected once I start talking. Tranquil Woods.
This area looks promising.
There! Prickle Boar!
That's new. The controller rumbles when they see you. Makes it feel that much more visceral. All right, time to learn a very new combat system. I'm game. Let's do this. You mean nicer than Zestiria, Grail? I don't know about nicer. I do think another way in which the just its particular stylization comes through is that just the overall like way the visuals are represented is just different. Like I think of it's obviously not the same style, but the sort of distinctiveness of the visual representation of something like the Wind Waker in Zelda. This game feels to me of that same flavor of uniquely visual storytelling in the Tales series. Nash City, that is how I remember it. Combo attacks can be performed based on the number of souls each character currently possesses. Already, that is some interesting naming. Use any combination of all 4 of the buttons, the shape buttons, to perform a 3-hit combo. So they literally introduce it as button mashing. That's why I remember it as button mashing. Amazing! I will be interested to try to really do my level-headed best this time to learn the system and see if there is more to it than button mashing as you get into it. I'm sure there is, and I'm sure I probably won't be able to get that advanced at it. You gain souls by stunning, defeating, or inflicting status ailments. That seems straightforward enough. I like the way her moves flow. Has a nice martial arts style to it.
Is that all?
Oh, and we're back to a world where we can just run away from battle by literally running away from the battle, as opposed to selecting a button on the menu. I think I prefer that, if you were to put a gun to my head and ask me which way of running away makes the most sense. Because it feels more like actually running away. Yeah, like it's just hard to keep track of all the things that are happening and make it make sense, Grail. I get that. I think that was a lot of my challenge that we talked about with Zestiria as well, where I am fully confident that that overall battle system made sense. I just felt like it was too much for me to like track and learn and manage on an ongoing basis. But I'm going to do my best here, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so when the gauge is zeroed out, it's basically the same thing as when we had 0 SC in Zestiria. It's easy enough to wrap one's head around. That reads to me like they totally know how messed up the camera was in Zestiria, and they're deliberately calling it out. So hopefully that foresages that we don't have the same issue in this that we did with those cramped spaces in Zestiria fights. Oh my god, you're right, Grail. That's amazing! See, I hadn't even tried because I just accepted my fate that I would never be able to move the camera angle. I feel so free! Look at this! Oh my god! Is this what game journalist hacks mean when they talk about immersion? Oh, I feel so immersed! That's it. Best Tales game, hands down, just for that.
Not bad.
Okay, so interesting. At least if this is telling us the whole story in contrast to some of the early Zestiria tutorials, this is going to be different than the Zestiria system because Zestiria, there were actually trade-offs for attacking with high SC versus low SC, where low SC actually gave you more power per hit, but it was harder to combo. Whereas this, it seems like you just lose flexibility and strength as you lose SG, but obviously, if an enemy isn't able to respond, it's worth it to do the damage anyway. That seems promising in terms of being easier for old Aaron to wrap his head around. One of the things that made me smile until I got really frustrated by it and wanted it to change in Tales of Destiny was not just being back in the glory days of camera angles being fixed, but being back in the days where in the like two-dimensional battles, your little team of Stan and company would actually have to run back to their starting positions before the battle could end. So half the time you would have them run to face off against the enemy and then the battle would be over, but then you'd have to wait like 10 more seconds for them to run back and all of the like ending cards to run before you could actually leave the battle. How times have changed, my friends. Yeah, in Grail, they just call that... In Grail, well, in this game, Grail, they just call that the tongue as opposed to the ancient tongue. Which would have been funnier if my tongue had cooperated. It's Friday, we're jamming. Oh, my controller just rumbled. That was pretty uncomfortable because this place is scary to me.
This place isn't safe. That hole's gotten bigger. I've told them 1,000 times they ought to build a fence, but they keep saying it's forbidden land. Even Celica used to scare me with it. She was always, "This is a gateway to the underworld." Well, I'm too old to keep falling for that nonsense.
Yeah, I'm 16. I know everything now. Nothing in life from here on out is going to surprise or challenge me whatsoever. Yeah, it is spooky. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the beginning of Dante's Divine Commedia when he talks about... I mean, the beginning is like allegory, right? Because he talks about being at the midpoint of his life and walking in a wood and being like running across these very symbolic beasts and kind of stumbling upon this door. But like when I read it, when I was probably about Velvet's age, I remember it as just the funniest image of in my head of like this guy is wandering through a woods and he just like stumbles upon this door that's like, "Oh, abandon all hope, ye who enter here." He's like, "Oh, door to hell." And that's how Dante started on his 60-hour JRPG adventure, which is now regarded as one of the greatest works of literature of all time. She definitely has authentic teenager vibes. I was trying to do a preemptive strike on the prickle boars, but I guess we can't do that here.
Not bad. This should be enough to cover the medicine. I'd better bring these to the store.
I think one of the most noticeable changes in skit structure from Zestiria into Berseria here, which I know they just doubled down on in what I felt like was a really cool way in Arise afterwards, was the way that the subsequent panels will cut in from the sides of the screen as opposed to just being little static windows showing the characters' interaction that are consistently on the screen throughout the whole of the skit. And I feel like, at least in terms of how I read those things, that is a nice way of making the skits a little more dynamic and engaging and seem like, I guess, a little more like a comic book in terms of it's a conversation, but it's also a form of action. Whereas in previous games, it's more of almost like talking heads, like what you would get on a like a Zoom call or an interview or something. Oh, thank you for calling that out, Pink Moon Neko. I think it's because another thing that's different in this one is that they aren't showing skit titles on the bottom of the screen, and so it's much harder for me to keep track of that button.
The cold weather's been terrible on everyone's crops, but at least the city will buy our prickleborn meat now. Luffy and Arthur have been hoping the village could start raising them, but they can just be so temperamental. I wonder if they could be bred with more docile pigs. What would we call them? Oinklebores?
Yeah, I prefer it when the titles stay on screen.
What about Picklebore? Yeah, Picklebore!
Especially when I'm going through an area for the first time I'm taking the area in. I can't always be counted on to notice the name of the skit right away. But now that I know, I will try to keep half an eye trained on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And yeah, on Arise, I'm with you, Grail. I always feel bad because I love the skits, and I feel like some of the best content in all of the Tales games in terms of interesting story moments ends up being in the skits. But I always end up fatigued just by the sheer number of skits and amount of content by the end of the game. And especially since Arise has a trophy associated with seeing like 95% of the skits or something ridiculous, I definitely got more than a little overwhelmed by just the raw volume of those conversations by the time I was done with it. I loved them though. If you just go into it knowing that they're going to be that intensive and long and involved, I feel like that makes a lot of difference.
Wait, the boars I hunted, are you there?
We are going to take our revenge on you and thereby teach you about the nature of revenge.
Never waver once you're...
See, it's all connected.
Control your feelings to control the tide of battle.
Interesting. Control your feelings. Govern yourself. I'm sensing some themes. My theme senses is tinglings. Oh no, the Dark Turtles. He's haunting me. Hidden arts focus on damage and attack range, but use more of your SG than martial arts. Searing Edge is effective against Beast. Okay. And exploit weak spots. Damn, they really did that. No, it's just called good storytelling, Grail. We call it foreshadowing. That's when the end is contained in the beginning. Though I do remember Berseria more or less hitting you over the head with some of its themes. So it'll be interesting, because I felt like the previous games we've streamed do not do that, so it'll be interesting to take that as we go on as a jumping off point and ask, okay, given the stuff it's being really explicit about, what can we tease out that's a little less explicit? Or what might they be showing us versus what they're saying and telling us? Okay. Well, we're only just learning about the second art type, and I'm a little nervous because I'm already starting to feel slightly overwhelmed. That's okay. Doesn't have to be that complicated. We'll just work through it one art at a time. And this is what it wants us to do for now. Jesus Christ. That's a demon pig.
An exorcist art.
Pride and anxiety, pity for the enemy, thrill of victory. Your emotions run too hot. That will be your downfall. Agreed. It's one of her virtues as well.
That does make me feel better, Grail. Thank you.
Yes, I know. But even so, she's got to...
You know how much that ground my gears in Zestiria.
Arthur?
He's talking to someone we can't see.
Arthur's fourth maxim. Never let your guard down, even when victorious.
Got it.
In any case, this should be enough to buy Lafisette's medicine. I'll drop the prickle boars off at the shop before I head out.
Head out where?
The person I was supposed to meet is late. I don't think I'll be home tonight. I came out here to let you know. You'll have to pick up the medicine yourself.
Right.
One more thing. I saw a group of demons near the village. If you're attacked, run away. Am I clear?
No way! I can handle a bunch of...
Demons can only be challenged by those with the talent for exorcism. That's the cold logic of the world, and no emotions can change it.
Logic versus emotion, baby.
Do you think I could become an exorcist?
Why is it you think that birds fly?
Why? Well, without flying, they couldn't find food.
It takes a particular innate talent to be an exorcist. Unfortunately, very few humans have it within themselves.
It's called a motif, my friends.
All right.
Tomorrow is Celica's Memorial Day. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Hurry back. I'll make you a quiche, just the way she taught me.
I will also say it's kind of nice and interesting where after just wrapping up Zestiria, a game featuring an end game that we discussed focuses on a bunch of characters talking about their answer without an explicit definition of what the question they're answering is, that this game now dives right into a question that's going to frame up a lot of its storytelling without so much focus on the answer per se, but rather the act of asking the question. I think that's some nice bookending. Do we know, or can we look up who voices Arthur? Because I can so vividly hear him voicing someone else in something I just played recently, but I can't place him to save my life. He sounds like a very well-known VA, though, so I'm embarrassed.
I wonder if those prickle boars were brothers. Maybe I should have let them go. But then, how would I pay for Laffy's medicine? Hunting took care of that. And it means food for us as well. I had no other choice. It was a rational decision. But the fact that I'm still worrying about it shows that my feelings are getting the better of me.
Village of Longing. Yeah, I didn't catch that was the characteristic title of the village either. What an interesting name for the Outset Village in a game that seems so concerned with governing one's emotions.
Nico, here for groceries?
Yep. And you must have been out hunting.
Got it. Thanks, Grail.
Yeah, it was a good
Maybe
haul.
I'm thinking of her
Look
eyes.
at you, lady
I feel like I'm
breadwinner.
thinking of something else, though.
If you were a boy, I think I'd be in love.
Good thing I'm a girl.
Oh, yeah? You ought to do something about your style, then.
Yeah. I kind of broke my comb.
So get a new one.
Sure, I'd like to, but
Agreed, Grail. I'm a sucker for fall weather.
How about a sail on combs for the pretty girl?
I grew up in New England, and if the leaves don't change, I'm not living.
Fine, Nico. I'm just here to pick up medicine for Laphicet.
Oh, Velvet. I already told Arthur, but I'm afraid the medicine hasn't come in yet.
What? Why not? Is it because of the demons?
Seems like the demon blight's really taking a toll on the city. There's even a group of them lurking around here now.
When's it coming then?
I can't say. And I don't know how much it will cost.
Oh no.
Ugh, what is wrong with Midgand? I mean, don't they have an army or something?
Those guys? The demons already routed them a while back.
But we're safe here, right? After all, your brother-in-law's an exorcist.
You're so sure about that? Arthur can't even use his right hand anymore. Poor fellow couldn't even protect his own wife and child.
Wow. Not a lot of sympathy from these villagers.
Of course. For now, here, on the house.
Or even tact.
Velvet! You didn't forget, did you?
You promised to teach me how to make your special quiche.
You mean for that apprentice animal doctor you had your eye on? You were serious?
Beyond serious?
Please. This is life or death for me.
But I thought your folks weren't keen on the two of you dating.
Who cares what people think? The important thing is my feelings.
I like the way you talk. If I were a boy, I think I'd be in love.
Darn right!
Man, doesn't it suck that we can't just be
Laphicet
gay?
must be starving by now. I'd better hurry home.
I think it is interesting because, I think we've all agreed at this point that these villagers seem like the most insensitive people in the world. But it's an interesting color, especially following up on some of our other Tales playthroughs, because like it's pretty common in these games for the main character to end up a pariah or outcast from the village they start out in for one reason or another, right? Like Lloyd and Genus are cast out of Visalia. Everyone hates Emil in Lewin. Luke has a fraught relationship with, well, kind of everything to do with his home and identity. But usually, like, there's a reason or some excuse for why they're seen as an outsider or something that they've done wrong that the village doesn't like. Here, it's this weirdly different, like almost more alienating color where it seems like the villagers are acting as though they don't have a problem with Velvet and they like her fine, but they just have no like emotional intelligence or ability to treat her well with regard to what she and her family have been through. I wonder whether we'll get more of an explanation of why that's the case in terms of either Velvet's past or just the nature of people in this world, as it could really be explained either way.
Orthe and Russ seem pretty down today.
I know. They've been whimpering like this for an hour now.
Well, they've always been a bit wimpy. The other day, that kitty Rollo chased both of them up a tree by himself.
They're hopeless. Whenever it's thundering out, they both dive into my bed, shivering.
Orthe, Russ...
That sounds like my doggy.
You're Nico's bodyguards, right? Start acting like it.
Oh,
They're completely
good eye.
hopeless.
Thank you, Pink Moon Neko.
But they're so cute, so I forgive them.
Fabulous.
Celica taught you how to make your special quiches, right, Velvet?
Yeah, but mine aren't nearly as good as hers.
Don't be modest. They're fantastic. Simple, yet elegant.
That's because there's a secret in the cheese on the dough.
You should try selling them in Taliesin. I'm sure they'd be a hit. We could make them together and take them on the road. We could even wear matching uniforms.
Would it make more money than hunting fricklebores?
Definitely.
Grail, is the game volume loud enough now? Do I need to mess with it anymore?
In front of the customers.
Then it might be worth a try. I do want to buy Laphie a nice heavy winter coat. And Arthur's gloves are in tatters, so he needs new ones.
Oh, don't be so boring. I get where you're coming from, but come on.
Dream, Velvet! Dream!
Think big? No thanks. I want a peaceful life with Luffy and Arthur.
Excellent, thank you.
You're impossible. Then again, maybe that's why your quiches taste so darn good.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought about the Villager's Grail. Maybe almost part of it is, and obviously this is really early game speculation since we've only been playing for like 45 minutes or something, but, you know, Arthur, a slip of the tongue, Arthur, whom we know to be an exorcist who is one of, you know, like a few and select people who have the ability to do things like deal with demons, is also the one who seems concerned with sort of mastering one's emotions and disciplining one's actions with logic. And so maybe the idea is almost that it belongs to that elite and more capable part of society to be able to sort of give yourself a filter and more actively reflect on the impact of what one is going to do and say before one says things. And sort of the ordinary rabble who would never be able to do that also don't really have a filter in between their thoughts and their mouth. So they just say whatever's on their mind, which then ends up, of course, being a case of them speaking without thinking and letting their prejudices show, as you say.
Hi, Celica. I'm back. I can't believe it's been 7 years since we lost you. And the baby you carried. Oh, drat. I forgot to bring your princess.
Okay, so we're 7 years after the
I know how much you,
earlier sequence of the introduction.
loved those flowers. And I know your child would have too.
Which means Velvet would have been 9 in that opening sequence.
I'll pick some from the Cape tomorrow.
We're doing age math, my friends. Look at all these collectibles. Nutmeg! I'm hooked! That's all I need to get me into this game. Give me some classic spices. Anything but math!
Welcome home, Velvet.
Luffy, I told you to stay in bed.
I was only up for a little.
Look, your fever hasn't gone down a bit. Go lie down and I'll cook dinner.
I'm sorry.
What's this?
A compass. It uses a magnet to tell you which way you're facing.
Woohoo! You can use the sun and stars for that.
And what'll you do if it's cloudy, huh? Thanks to this invention, we'll even be able to voyage across the ocean.
I've heard Laffy's VA somewhere recently too. All these VAs are super familiar to me.
Level, so your heading will be true even when the ship is rolling with the waves. Pretty neat, right?
If you say so, Luffy.
Come on, it's a must-have for any adventure. Can't you see how useful it is?
You can tell me more about it later.
Did they hurt you?
Not a scratch, and I brought back plenty. I can hear Arthur already.
Gosh, Velvet, I think it's time you learned all my secret arts.
He isn't coming home tonight, is he?
How do you know that?
There is stuff I
So
can
you know
tell
secondhand about all the yuckness of math, Pink Moon Echo.
Huh, you really can talk to Malakim, can't you?
Yeah, Arthur says I've got exorcist potential.
No kidding. I think you'll be an exorcist to rival even him.
Malakim, okay. So we have
You've been learning all sorts of things from his book
a
collection.
new term for invisible spirits, I think.
really want to become an exorcist. I want to go traveling with you and see all the wonders of the world. I'll hunt and chop firewood, and if demons come for us, I'll defend you. I wish I could do that.
Telling you, Grail, to your point, the one time I really enjoyed math recently was the part of my Wittgenstein work for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that made me have to relearn more math and logic underpinning math than I was prepared for. So, right there with you.
You'll get there, Laphicet. It should only take... 20 years tops.
It won't take me that long.
Oh yeah? You better prove it to me then. Start with this lovely meatball stew I cooked. Eat every last mouthful, even if you don't feel hungry. And take your medicine, no matter how nasty it tastes. No tricks. Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Oh, does that mean to cut Velvet off?
It's so easy to light Arthur's firewood. I wonder what his trick is.
Velvet? Could you not put any spinach in the stew?
Huh. You'll never grow up.
One of the most important things, I think, is being in touch with your passions, Pink Moon Neko.
But just for today?
I'm glad you have literature for that.
Fine, fine.
Obviously, that's near and dear to our hearts as well, here at With a Terrible Fate.
I'll make it that curry flavor you like.
Really? Thanks, Velvet.
There's some of Arthur's special curry spice upstairs, isn't there? Isn't this Arthur's book? Is Laffy really reading stuff this dense? Poor kid's gonna squint his eyes right out.
The Nameless Empyrean.
The day before Scarlet Night, Sis went prickle boar hunting on her own. She's almost as good a fighter as Arthur, so I know those prickle boars don't stand a chance. But I worry that she's too athletic to land a husband. Maybe she should try to be more ladylike.
Little scamp. He just knew I was reading this, didn't he? There you go. Not spicy hot, but oh so delicious. Oh yeah, I saw Miko today, and she had very important things to talk about. She's coming over in the next couple days, so be on your best behavior.
I will. I'm glad you've got a good friend.
Yeah, we've known each other since forever. Still, Miko falling in love? I can barely wrap my head around it. Laffy, you know, if there's a girl you like, you'll tell Big Sister all about it, right?
Girl?
You're a stubborn little brat, so you might need an older girl to keep you under control. Oh, and she's gotta be a good cook. A pro in the kitchen is a success at life.
Knock it off, Velvet! You should be more worried about your own love life.
Me? I've got enough on my mind. For one thing...
Yeah, I see what you were saying about skit-based storytelling back when we were doing Alisha's story, Grail.
Besides, getting crushes on strange men? I just don't see what's so... Laffy, what's wrong?
I really like this whole beginning sequence in terms of the way it interacts with the game's framing and that introductory animation as well. Because, like in another game, if you were just idling around the town and talking about, oh, who's got a crush on who and when are you going to marry and how are you going to find a husband, it might be, it might feel either kind of boring or antiquated or just kind of idle. But knowing how bad things were and then how bad things are going to get just based on that opening sequence, it's kind of almost like a super uncomfortable feeling to me of the calm before the storm. Like this was the one special quiet moment when like everyone felt safe enough to have these sorts of very mundane concerns, only for it then to be snatched away. Seems like Arthur is quite the academic. Reminds me a bit of someone we knew in Zestiria. Yeah, well, as you say, Grail, the skits are just woven directly into the substance of the story, so that's probably part of it. Like, Arise has so many really long skits, but they're more of the, optional content for quiet moments at a campfire in between the main story and things like that. So it's a very different experience of how they're woven into the game overall.
Are you all right? I'll bring you some water. I'm fine. You just said something funny is all, and it made me choke a bit.
As long as you're okay. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
Who knows what the future holds?
Yeah, but what more can I do? I've got a duty to look after my little brother, and I'm serious about it.
I know, but I'm trying to look after you too. I want you to be happy. That's all. And it's not just me. Arthur worries about you too.
Well, we're family, right?
Yeah, that's what families do.
Thanks, Laffy. For you, I'd kill every last prickle boar in the forest if it came down to it.
Aww. Such a weird but heartwarming sentiment.
Hurry and get dinner ready.
Did you hear me, Velvet? That's the one thing I care about. No spinach! Please! It was a couple years, wasn't it? And Zestiria was, I think, 2015. This was 2017.
Good boy. You didn't forget your medicine.
Well, I did promise.
It'd be interesting to see how much they were developed in parallel versus in series. I don't know anything about that.
Just like that night that changed our lives.
Velvet, may I sleep next to you tonight?
Of course.
Velvet the sister mom.
Okay, let's see. Today, I've got to dry some meat.
Got it.
Use that cheese I've been saving to make a quiche for... Laffy? You little... Where have you gone?
Hey, Newtonia. It's Aaron. Welcome back. Haven't seen you in a while.
I bet your fever hasn't even gone down.
Hey, Itchy. Good to see you too. Welcome back. Glad you found your way back the various winding cyberspace roads from Wednesday to now. We missed you at the outset. We are diving into Berseria now. Hey, Newtonia. I know we've chatted like general philosophy in the past. I will warn you, we have just started the kickoff to a new JRPG that is following up on a JRPG that we played right before this, and we are pretty deep into the story, so it is not going to be an evening for general philosophy discussion here. But appreciate you thinking of us in that regard. We've squatted up, Grail. I don't know how it happened. Maybe just everyone heard we were starting a new game, and also that we're really cool and thoughtful.
Laffy been here?
No.
The Thoughtful Gamer Squad. I love it.
Wait, that's one of Arthur's.
Actually, it's a copy that Laphicet made. A smart merchant would pay a pretty penny for this book. I gave him a fair trade.
Laffy, did he really copy all that by hand? Oh, he must have done it to buy that compass.
No, though he gave it some puppy eyes. Told him I'd throw it in for free, but he said that it would be a bad deal for me.
No.
He's a good lad, but not the merchant type.
So, what did he use the money for?
I'm afraid my lips are sealed. You'll have to ask him.
Yeah, it really moved me as well back when I first played it, Itchy, and that was even when I didn't have that vivid a memory of Zestiria, so I've already been really enjoying diving back into it. And it is early days, as you can see.
He was headed for the forest. I'll help you look for him. Thanks. Do a sweep of the village, just in case. I'll check the forest. I know. He might have gone to the cape to pick flowers.
Well, I think everyone here at this point knows the goal, but it is delightful that we all have different opinions. In fact, since you're all here, I'll tell you, one of the cool things about squatting up, as I've said so many times, one of my favorite parts about the stream is, especially doing it with a close reading of JRPGs, it feels like a real-life JRPG party going on an adventure together. So all the better for us to have a bunch of different opinions. My hope is always that by the end of it, we'll have a different perspective to maybe influence or color our opinions in new and fun ways. But by all means, if we all leave with different views that are still different from each other's respective views, then we've all won in a way that is greater than the sum of its parts or any individual opinion. So let's fucking do it.
Join the search, but they won't move at all. It's like they're scared of something.
The discussions are the best part, Grail. I say that even when I'm talking to myself like a crazy person, so I'm just giddy with the company now.
Hey, Velvet.
Buckle up, buckaroos.
Tonight is going to be another scarlet night.
I remember the moon turned red 7 years ago. But what is it anyway?
It's a red lunar eclipse. It happens every several years or so. Apparently, you can predict the next one by watching the movements of the stars. According to legend, a crimson moon is a gate that connects our world to the next. It's also said to be proof of humanity's sins.
You sure know a lot about it.
Laphicet taught me just a few minutes ago.
You saw Laffy? Where'd he go?
Actually, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, you start asking yourself questions of the kind that Zestiria poses in a vacuum, Grail, and, well, let's just say I was clean-shaven when we started the stream, and leave it at that. I wasn't, but it feels like that in some ways. I want to be thoughtful about not spoiling this game for people who haven't played it or haven't played it in a while. But I will say, just as something to wet everyone's whistle for the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about going forward. So we've already seen, and it's like literally the slogan for the game, so it's not giving anything away, the like duality and tension between logic and emotion, or logic and reason. That's key to a lot of what goes on in this game. And I think a big part of why the game was interesting to me and sort of prodded the philosophical side of me back when I first played it was actually one of the classes I took in undergrad that really left an impression on me was a course on the philosophy of emotion. And one kind of relatively niche topic that a few people have written on in that literature is the question of, is it possible for there to be a logic to emotions? Like, is there a certain sense in which we can apply reason or rules from premises to conclusions when we think about the cadence and utility and intentionality of just emotional experiences. And I think, while that might seem like a very abstract question when you're out there thinking about it philosophically, I think a lot of the places that this plot is going to take us sort of make that exact problem and question much more visceral and interesting. So I'll probably have quite a bit more to say about that as we plug away here.
Have you seen Laphicet?
Nope. Can't say that I have.
All right. Let me know the second you see him.
Got it.
Yeah, the Vulcans loom large in this thematic universe. No doubt about that, Itchy.
He needs his rest, but he's always walking around or reading outside.
I can't say I'm surprised. He's always been a curious lad. He likes reading difficult books. When I saw him the other day, he told me all about the latest navigation techniques and exotic farming methods, too. Only one kid in a million is as smart as he is.
You're exaggerating. Well, maybe not.
It's a shame. If he could go to school in the capital, I'm sure he'd make a name for himself as a scholar.
But alas, we are a bunch of poor, uneducated farmhands.
Taliesin? No way. Not happening. Even if he gets better, I could never let him go that far away all by himself.
He can handle it. He's actually a very responsible boy. I don't think you need to worry.
I couldn't handle it. I would worry. And be lonely.
Yeah, you too, Itchy. It means a lot that you popped in. Pleasure to see you. If you're interested in it, definitely check out the VOD on our YouTube channel later, and hope to see you on future streams as well. Since we're partying up, I will let you all know that this is a official IRL Vesperia stream because we have our own Rapide joining the party. She'll say hi real quick. Little Evie the Corgi, aka Rapide, aka the one who has to talk through all the philosophy of game storytelling theory with me when I'm not on stream talking with other people. So she knows more than she ought to. And yet it's funny, no matter how many conversations we have, she mostly just stares at me in silent, solemn judgment. Which, boy, you've never been forced to forge your thoughts in fire so much as when they were judged by a quiet and attentive corgi. Let me tell you. Oh God! Oh, the Scarlet Moon! It opened a door to the dog dimension. That's my power. The Ginunga Gap houses the door to demons, and my webcam houses the door to doggies. So am I going in the right? Yeah, it just says to search for Laffy. Oh, I guess he's in the village. I joked about it a few minutes ago, but I really do think Velvet is a really great example of what I guess you would call, I can't think of a better term for it than the sister mom trope, right? When you have like an older sister who, because of the loss of their parents, has been forced to adopt a mom role too. So I think I would definitely say she's overprotective, but in a way that makes sense and feels very maternal to me in terms of the relationship they've had and presumably what they've had to cope with. So is he up this way? Like Rain. Rain is another good example of that, actually, as I think of it. I guess one doesn't automatically code her in that way just because she's a little older than Velvet is when we see her in Symphonia. But you could see a younger Rain and Genus, or at least I could, being very thematically similar to what we've seen in these first few motions of Velvet and Lafisette's relationship. I keep pressing square to guard. Gonna have to train that out of my system. That's the literal and most overt theme of Tales of Praxis, Grail. It is all connected. Stop talking up Graces, though, dude. I got my replacement PS3 in the mail yesterday, so if I'm not careful, I'll start that up and binge all of it in a weekend or something crazy.
I was just taking a break. Oh, you little... You know better than this, Lafiset. Running off without telling me. What if something happened to you? You wouldn't be the only one hurt. Do you understand that? I'm sorry. If you want to do something, just ask. I know I'm a crummy big sister, and I can't afford to buy you all the things you want.
That's a good idea, Grail. I might actually remap for that reason.
Why I went out. You see,
I love this music, by the way. I'm already remembering the appreciation I have, not just for this game's score, but also the really deft way that they weave it into the various scenes and cutscenes and different parts of the game.
For the graves. Yeah, so I was going out to the Cape, and I thought...
A lot of really cool leitmotifs on the piano.
Too, don't you? Well, yeah, that too. Fine. Just for today, though. Are you sure? I am. But next time you run off like that, I'm strapping you to your bed. Yes, ma'am. Good. It's off to the Cape then. Hooray!
She's also the sister mom of a sick younger sibling, slash surrogate child, which I think is significant. Like I think of, like the protagonist and Yona in Nier Gestalt and Replicant, or even, we don't really see it in the real-time narrative of Symphonia, but you might imagine Mythos and Martel under a similar dynamic with Martel's sickness that kind of incited everything in Symphonia. So I think that goes a long way towards explaining her kind of very high-strung anxiety around his well-being as well. Oh, thank you for the skit, Pink Moon Neko. I will get in the habit. I am just not in the habit yet.
Not bad.
Shh, Grail, it's way too early in this playthrough to start talking about Destiny. We only do that from like 3/4 of the way through a Tales game onward. Come on.
Remember how we went out together to pick Princessias on the morning of Celica's funeral? Yeah. I was only 4, but I remember. We couldn't find any in the village or at the Cape. Right. Because the...
Okay, math. So, Lafiset was 4 at the time, and we did math that Velvet was 9 because it was 7 years ago. So that means there's a 5-year age difference between them. So he's 11 years old right now. Okay. Age math.
Demons had made a mess of them. And then you suddenly started climbing down the edge of the cliff. You ran over and grabbed me. You had the scariest look on your face. Of course I did. Do you have any idea what I'd do if I lost you too? You'd still have Arthur. He'd help you. He'll help the world. He's quite the guy. That's probably true. But I'd still miss you like you wouldn't believe. I know. I'm sorry, sis. But down the cliff from where you were, a lone pair of Princessia were blooming. I remember. A gentle breeze came in, and it smelled like Celica. That's right. That's why I believe those flowers were a message from her.
Yeah, but Grail, that's your cross to bear. If you're going to go ahead in your playthrough, then you have to modulate back for the stream. Just think of it as an even further metagame challenge for you, since you seem to be extremely delighted to give yourself more and more of those. So if we're trying to keep track of symbols so far and overloading ourselves with how literary the game is, we already have Princessia flowers and a compass, and birds. I think those are the main ones so far. So 3, but for this early in the game, I mean, 3 is a pretty healthy handful.
How about I make you some apple boo when we get home?
Thank you, Pink Moon Echo.
Apple boo? What's that? Grated apples. Whenever I caught a cold when I was little, Celica would make it for me. It's sweet and tart and juicy and crisp. Eating it always made me feel better.
Well, apples are good for you. But what does the boo mean?
When I was a baby, I would always say boo-boo when I wanted to eat an apple.
So that's where the name comes from. Wait, you called apples boo-boo? You must have been a strange baby.
Well, that's
You used to do the
that's
same
just
thing.
fucking weird, sis.
When Celica and I heard you, we laughed so hard.
Boo!
Oh, that was cute. I was thinking too, it's interesting to see just in the early motions the way in which it's already echoing, but also riffing on not even specific plot ideas from Tales of Zestiria, but just the similar wells it's drawing from. Like, obviously, if you're coming to this after Zestiria and have all of the King Arthur inspiration in your head and influences, then Arthur being one of the main characters right away should set you off. But then also, we talked about the Christian influences in Zestiria in terms of it being in many dimensions a Christ narrative. And then right away in this, it's not the same colors, but we have things like demons and literal exorcist characters. So it kind of drawing from another dimension of that same religious tradition to kind of flesh out the world by fleshing out the same influences in ways that are not quite the same as the first game did.
Just look at all these. This place never changes, does it?
It does too change. The seasons, the wind, the weather. Change one and the sea's totally different. And the same goes for what lies across the sea.
Across the sea? Sometimes I just don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, Velvet. Thank you for taking me out here today.
You don't need to thank me. Hey, Luffy. Do you know why it is that birds fly?
Already becoming a motif.
Well, if they didn't, they couldn't catch food or escape from predators.
Thought so.
But you know, I think there's more to it than that. A bird that's born with wings has to... A demon!
Truer words have never been spoken, Grail.
No matter how much it hurts, run!
Like, everything was so much harder back then, even assuming you had your health.
You're going to be strong, like Arthur.
I know. And what are we without YouTube videos, Grail? It's on! Oh, we literally can't damage it. It's very demoralizing that it's giving us power hits and the power hits are still dealing 0. Oh. A few broken ribs, just a flesh wound. Luffy said no. The metagame was just too much for her, Grail. She couldn't min-max the way you can. Oh. He wanted to get her the comb that she needed for her hair.
How did I get home? Velvet! Luffy, you're all right. Sorry. It's all my fault.
No. If you weren't there, there's no telling what might have happened to me.
More first person.
Your old one broke, right? You've got beautiful hair. It would be a waste if you didn't take care of it. I'll make a new world. A world where my sister can be happy.
It's a very Tales thing to say. A kind of unnerving Tales thing to hear a young-looking boy saying after the stream of Symphonia with Mythos.
Scarlet Knight, what's going on? Was it all a dream? No, it wasn't.
Oh, it's just a night echoing the worst thing that's ever happened to this town in the last 7 years. What could go wrong? Not the children. Or really the kind of truly scary thing of children suspended in time who have lived for like thousands of years, like Mythos. Like if Mythos were just a kid, he would not be as scary as Mythos Yggdrasil as represented in Symphonia. Oh, thanks, Grail. You might have suggested that too late, but we'll probably be able to make it to the next save point.
What's happening?
Oh, we've got a window now. Perfect. Done and done.
Where are you?
Can we still not deal damage to them? Can we not get out that way? Maybe the other way? There we go. Well, at least they can't kill us during the tutorial. Wow, this is a major bummer. Yeah, I suppose since we literally could not damage the last one, it's not a good strategy to try to take these fellas on.
What on earth is going on? This is no time to be scared. I have to find Luffy.
Run like the wind. Oh my god! Wow! Talk about things escalating quickly.
No. The village.
Oh my god, and the controller rumbles every time one of them notices me, and it's just constantly rumbling.
Can't go this way.
Yeah, it is interesting and kind of suspicious, excuse me, that he was aware of the group of demons and called it out, but didn't do anything about it. Although it did seem, I mean, I'm trying not to read too much into it based on the fact that I've actually played the game, but it struck me as fairly clear from that opening scene, based on what we saw and what Velvet said in the voiceover, that she was betrayed by Arthur, so I think he's already coded as someone of whom we ought to be suspicious in terms of his motives and what it is that he is or isn't doing. Wow. How's that for a shot? Oof. Japanese games know how to do arresting things with moon imagery.
Oh, thank goodness. You kept Laffy safe, didn't you, Arthur?
Yeah, for real, Grail. I'll see if I can grab that.
Sentiment to cast off.
Velvet, run! Arthur!
Jesus!
Here, once, was the seal to the underworld broken. And tonight, here shall be born the power to save the world. With Lafayette's life as a sacrifice.
What are you saying?
Oh, is that right, Pink Moon Echo? Yeah, after we watch it, I'd love to hear the background context, because I don't know anything about that, but I'd love to benefit from your knowledge. That's what we saw without context at the very beginning of the game.
Let him go. This is an offering to the world.
Why would you?
Nothing can save him now.
No!
I see you will not change. Ever a slave to emotion.
Ooh. Wow, the way the art style shows how her rage just literally and figuratively erases herself. It's amazing. Jesus Christ!
demons.
Arthur.
A Therian.
Oh, here we go. Oh, we can hurt them now. Oh, without all the, like, pomp and circumstance and magical ceremony, you mean, Gro?
Take a look around.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's interesting. Oh. They look like
Demon blood
monsters
has
to
spread
you?
through the village. But do not fear.
That was a power move.
I, Artorius Colbrand, will end your pain.
Pretty good, right? Speaking of series I've been meaning to replay for a minute.
Ceres.
I smell Seraphim.
Why is it that birds fly? Behold my answer. Velvet.
Arthur.
I ask no forgiveness. The sin is mine to bear.
Yeah, speaking of overlap, Grail. Wow.
I will make you pay.
Talk about an opening. No, of course not, Grail. I love that opening so much, and I remember just having my jaw on the floor even more so than I do now the first time that I played it. I feel like two things are really cool about that, especially in the context of this Tales of Praxis series that we're doing. One, which I did not pick up on the first time I played it because Zestiria was not as fresh in my head, was if you think back and contrast what just happened with the other ritual sacrifice that should be pretty clear and present in our head, namely Muse's sacrifice of her human child who would then become Mikleo in order to seal and protect Camlon and bind Mautellus there. Like, that was A, not really shown in anywhere near as direct a way as what we just saw, and B, it was clearly coded as something that was just like an expression of a mother's love in a way that would save and protect and redeem the world, in something almost like Harry Potter-esque, right? Versus what we just saw, which was obviously very tonally different, much more in your face, and much more visceral in terms of this is actually what it means to sacrifice a child, and this is the emotion that would be attached to that, and how does that make you feel? We've also already seen the difference in storytelling perspective with the way that we're oftentimes being made to see like scenes directly through Velvet's eyes, which is similarly much more immediate and unmediated than what we got from the third party perspective of Tales of Zestiria and what we typically get in a lot of other Tales games and video games and just stories more broadly, which kind of also draws you closer to the visceral and you might say even emotional nature of that content. The other thing, right, just to keep in mind, because it's such an arresting opening, and I think part of that, especially for veterans of the Tales series who are familiar with some of these other games, even just the ones that we've played on stream, like think about the other three examples we have, Symphonia and Dawn of the New World and Zestiria. What do all of those have in common? Well, they all of them, to a T, start off with very clear and pretty immediate situations for setting off on some sort of quest across the world to do something, whether that's the journey of regeneration or following Marta to pick up and wake up Centurion cores, or go on the journey of the Shepherd in order to purge malevolence and save the world and beat the Lord of Calamity. And even beyond that, like I'm just wrapping up Vesperia, like I said, I'm going to go off on a journey to find the person who stole the Aqua Blastia, and I'm going to take this princess with me because she has something to tell my best friend. This, super different, right? You don't get a sense of quest. You get a sense of trying to find some semblance of normalcy and, dare I say, even boredom in a small town, very just rural and quiet life, and then having that totally upended and your family wrenched away from you for reasons that you don't understand. So instead of the story being kicked off with a clear directed quest that will then be challenged and subverted down the line, the story is kicked off by a total feeling of chaos and loss and rage and helplessness and lack of direction. So I think, especially as we're talking about sequels that aren't sequels, that do things that are sort of challenging to the norms of the Tales series, that's a great example of starting out a mothership Tales game on a note that is not only different from, but kind of antithetical to what you would expect from your ordinary run-of-the-mill Tales opening sequence. And in a really cool way. I'm here for it.
So did my world come to an end. And for 3 long years...
And we're back. 3 years later, she's 19. Age math.
In that pit of darkness and fed. Devouring demons. So I could live. So I could live long enough to kill him. And be my brother's vengeance.
Yeah, and to be clear, Grail, that's what I was trying to explicate in my opening spiel when I called them like sequels that aren't sequels. That was my whole point about why I think it's important that they're not called just Tales of Symphonia 2 or Tales of Zestiria 2. I think what's interesting and cool about them is that they're certainly in conversation with specific games that came before them in the series, but they're doing kind of more interesting and indirect and subversive things with that previous game than we would typically expect of something like a sequel that follows up on the plot in ways that just extend the story that came before, or a prequel that sets out the like the initial conditions from which the previous plot came. So that, yeah, exactly. We're on the same page.
Where is he? First, there will be a test.
I hate tests.
Decide decide if you are worth teaching.
But first, you have to be taught in order to participate in the test that will decide if you are worth teaching. There we go. That's the same as Zestiria.
Here I come. If you are not, I will kill you. Ready yourself.
It's a good question, Pink Moon Neko. I think it's the exact right kind of question to be asking on this stream. I don't want to kind of give away the farm since we're just starting this game, and I don't remember it well enough to kind of put it totally in context relative to Zestiria. But I think in terms of like the very general picture of what I'm sketching in terms of how it's a sequel but not a sequel, I think deconstruction is a great term for it. Yes, when there's like a follow-up story that is taking what has come before in a story, but is kind of rearranging the pieces of it in a different way to show you a different way of looking at it. Actually, Wittgenstein, I don't have the quote on me, but he said something really interesting about the nature of dream analysis, where it's almost like, you know, if you think of a psychiatrist listening to someone tell him about their dreams and then explaining that dream to the person, it's almost as if you could imagine like someone giving you a picture and then you cut up the picture and rearrange the pieces in a different way and show it to that person, and they see it in a totally different way that makes sense to them in some regard that they didn't expect antecedently. I think it's something very similar where it's like deconstructing, but then reconstructing and reinterpreting content that we thought about and took lessons from in one way, only to show us now a totally new way of thinking about it that doesn't take away from the initial lesson, but in fact adds to it in a way that we never would have expected and probably wouldn't have gotten from something that's a more direct continuation, like a sequel as we traditionally think of it.
You noticed. Well done. You pass.
Of course. His Moloch would never be so weak as that.
I am his Moloch no longer.
That's something I still need to watch, Grail, but I've certainly heard that about it.
First,
It's one of the reasons I want to watch it.
These past 3 years. There are exorcists now throughout the land, challenging the reign of demons with the help of...
Tell me. Tell me where Artorias is.
You may find him in the capital city of Logris in Midgand. You won't stop to listen. I can tell you what it was you saw that night. That night, the ritual he performed shifted the very course of the world. A host of Malachim descended, and with their strength, the emergent exorcists quelled the demon tide. Now, he serves as leader of the Exorcists' Abbey, an institution that enjoys the unconditional faith of the kingdom and public. A shield to guard the people and a sword against demons, Artorias Colbrand, the world's savior.
Now he's Artorias, no longer
With
Arthur.
power stolen by sacrificing Laphicet.
The biggest hype man in the history of this world.
But his power is not yet absolute. The man can still be killed.
Why are you doing this?
Make a successful escape from this place, and I'll explain.
Escape? So that's your game. Fine. I don't care what the world thinks of me. What matters is my vengeance against Artorias. That's all.
I have shattered your yoke. We must hurry.
this is going to bother me because I can't think of the game I'm thinking of, but the way that Velvet is talking about like defining her mission based on revenge, it puts me in mind of another game that I think I've played pretty recently. Okay, this is what Focus does, because I forgot what Focus did by the end of Zestiria. It affects SG regeneration and chance of inflicting status effects. Great. But there's another game that I think I played in the decently recent past where like it did a great job of making it seem like the hero's journey was very tightly and solely defined by revenge for most of the game. And then, of course, it ended up evolving into something more. But it was like it had an interesting way of grounding things in terms of revenge and building it up from there. And obviously, a lot of games and stories have to do with revenge, but there's a specific one I'm thinking of. It's not going to come to me. I'll try to find it after the stream. I pulled the quote from Wittgenstein because I used it in my book that I wrote about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So since it's quick, I just wanted to read it because it's so great. Speaking about a dream that is told to a psychoanalyst, he says, "You might think of it, that is the dream, as performed on the stage, with a plot that is sometimes fairly incomprehensible, but also in part quite comprehensible, or at least apparently so, and as though this plot were then torn into little pieces, and each part given a completely different meaning." So that same kind of rearrangement in order to present a different mode of understanding to the person who has had that first experience. I think that's a nice way of thinking about what you called the deconstructive Pink Moon Neko, and what we're thinking about in terms of the nature of Berseria relative to Zestiria here. Nier is definitely kind of, in one reading of it, a very certain and kind of existential sort of revenge, but that's not what I'm thinking of. It feels like a kind of like very old school callback to me, Grail. Like they're almost trying to do like, you know, very retro Castlevania or something like that, which fits with the area. Or Devil May Cry or something. I don't think there's anything in these. Oh, here's something. You can't go through a Tales prison without opening every single cell and searching them.
You will need equipment. There are weapons in the room ahead.
I guess Final Fantasy 16 is kind of that revenge story, but again, I'm 90% sure that's not the game or story I was thinking of. I'm going to have to just put it out of my mind for now. It's going to eat away at me for the remaining 40 minutes of the stream.
No one raised the alarm.
I can see that.
Take what you need from here.
So as equipment, do we also have clothes for this poor girl? Remember when we were feeling bad for poor Simone who didn't get enough from her Lord of Calamity union benefits to afford a full outfit? Well, she was positively overdressed compared to poor Velvet here.
It looks like they kept prisoners' effects in here.
Well, it's all relative in this game, isn't it, Grail?
This will be useful.
As we will soon find out.
Quite a blade.
I know that sword. Stormhowl. What is it doing here?
Well, it's too big for me.
You're not taking it? It's a celebrated masterpiece.
And if I can't use it, it's worthless.
Yeah, I don't care about that. Is it revenge against Artorias? Because if not, I don't care about it. Slightly more dressed.
Are you ready then?
What's going on here?
Oh no! Why did they leave me as the only knight on duty?
Ordinary soldier. He's an exorcist overlord.
You didn't even flinch.
I already told you. I am his Moloch no longer.
Is there a ship waiting?
So you already know we're on an island.
Yes. I've learned that this is a prison island for violent criminals, and that there are scores of demons locked away here. Demons say lots of things when they don't want you to eat them.
The prison has docks at both the front and rear entrances. Our ship is on the back side.
Got it. The back docks.
Notice also how 3 years have totally eroded the Disney princess quality out of poor Velvet's voice. That's gone now. Yeah, it just fills up your lungs and eats them away. It's like 30 years of chain smoking condensed into 3 years of suffering.
Think of them as the souls belonging to a family of Malachim. They appeared all over after the Advent 3 years ago.
Another after effect of the Advent.
If you collect enough of them, you might be able to solicit the cooperation of a Moloch family.
And I'm supposed to take your word for it?
I'm not forcing you to do anything. Whether you collect them or not is up to you.
I might as well pick them up. I'll use every tool at my disposal.
Except for Stormhell.
You'll have
Not
to if you want
Stormhell.
revenge.
Confusing just in the sense of not being able to navigate Pink Moon Neko. Is that what you mean? Yeah, I got lost in the mazes of Zestiria quite a few times, as Grail knows.
Did you hear? The path around the island is off limits now. They say the ground's weak and could collapse.
The path that goes under the watchtower? That's alright. Nobody uses it anyway.
True, but it was a nice shortcut to the docks.
Shortcut to the docks. Under the watchtower.
A number of guards have gone missing. It would seem we have intruders on the island. All exorcists, break into 2 groups and converge at the front and rear gates.
Understood. No one will get past us.
Stay sharp. The threat could be serious.
Yes, sir.
This isn't going to be easy.
Then we'll need reinforcements of our own. Where are the cells?
They should be on this floor. Plan on involving the other prisoners?
I'll use any tool I have at my disposal.
Three years chiseled away any Disney princess quality in her voice and any deontology in her ethical commitments. She is now strictly and purely and aggressively utilitarian. Arguably, one might say, to a fault. Can we go through either of the other ones? No. Alright. On to that beautiful shining star. The brightest star in the night sky. Brave Berseria. So you mean, what do you mean, Grail? If you mean like if Artorias had just explained like his motives and reasons to her right off the bat? Is that what you're saying? Well, I will say, not doing a challenge run and playing on normal, so far at least, these enemies are absolutely paper thin. Which I'm okay with after some of the other battles we've had recently on the stream. I mean, we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves in terms of, analyzing Artorias and Velvet too much when we're obviously just at the start of this playthrough of the game. But that said, I will say, just based on what we've seen and read together so far on this, I think like there is a reading or charitable explanation you can do of what goes on there, where it's not just like he's keeping his motives to himself for dramatic suspense or something, but because like he does say more than once, like he seems really invested in not just himself being ruled by logic and reason and stilling his emotions and quieting his inner life, but also like training and encouraging Velvet to do the same. But he also seems on some level to believe that she's not capable of that. And so we might imagine, just based on the little bits and pieces we have so far, that that capacity to prioritize reason and eschew emotion is essential to carrying out whatever it is that Artorias is trying to do, such that if Velvet is incapable of that, then he also can't trust her with his plan, and therefore he wouldn't explain it to her. So I get what you're saying, but I think even just from what we know about him so far, I can work my mind into understanding why it's not in Artorias' nature to like bring Velvet into his world and his machinations in that way.
Listen up! I'm opening every door to every cell. We're getting off this island.
What the hell? You serious?
Yeah, I think it'll help once we catch up with you a little bit, Grail. But definitely don't feel like that means you have to be quiet about it. We'll need to modulate a little bit for the group's sake.
Break through the gates and you'll have a ship.
But aren't they guarded by exorcists? I mean, that pirate Von Eifried's the only one who's ever broken out.
Eifried! You could never escape the great pirate Eifried, no matter which Tales game you're in.
Von Eifried and Melchior.
The man, the myth, sometimes the little girl, the legend.
I'm with you. Anything's better than another day in this rat
Let's do
hole.
it. I'm going home to my family.
Me too!
Yeah!
Let me out,
Girl.
Groups like us are always
I'm
up for
sick
sick
of
of the slop they feed us.
Yeah, the food sucks.
Let's go! We'll murder those exorcists!
Open all the doors!
That ought to draw the attention of the guards. In the meantime, we'll search for that watchtower. From there, we can follow the outer path down to the docks.
So you're leaving them all to their fates?
I told you, we'll use any tool I need.
Yeah, that's right, Grail. It's like the way the Moogle is the one fixed point in the Final Fantasy universe. Ifrit is the one unifying thread that connects everything. He is the Alpha and the Omega. Maxwell and Origin. Look, stranger things have happened. We had an epic level 99 grudge match with a Dark Turtles last week, so anything goes in the Tales
You're not
series.
going to escape.
Don't underestimate the exorcists. They're all gonna die like dogs. Or goblins.
This Abbey that's in charge of this place. They're that amazing.
Amazing doesn't even begin to cover it. The exorcists of the Abbey joined forces with the Kingdom of Midgand. And they've got the whole world in their pocket. They're merciless. They hunt down any human who becomes a demon. Going against them means taking on the whole world.
And I bet I know who's at the top.
Those who get captured and sent here are the lucky ones. We may be monsters, but at least we have our lives.
Sure, until they get fed to me. Thanks for the info.
Even if you manage to escape this place, thousands of exorcists controlling powerful Malachim will be out there waiting for you.
I can't
There's nowhere
wait.
for you to run. Nowhere.
I'm not going to run. I'll gladly die, as long as I take Artorias with me.
This is something of an obvious point, but also worth calling out. You know, we discussed how the game is different in its setup in terms of having sort of total disorientation rather than a quest to orient yourself, as you set out at the beginning. In a very similar spirit, I think what compounds the sense in which this cuts against the grain relative to other JRPGs and especially other Tales games is how, you know, very quickly in Tales games, typically you amass a sense of a party of, you know, at least one or two like-minded individuals who are going with you on that well-defined quest. Whereas here, the chaos very quickly left Velvet completely isolated and alone, literally in solitary confinement. And even now that she has kind of the begrudging arm's length guidance of Ceres with her, she's still very much on her own with her fixation on Artorias and what it is that she's trying to accomplish. So it feels more like we're seeing a single window into like one character's psychology rather than building a group of adventurers to go off on a journey together. Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to call out, Grail. Thank you for reminding me. How much of an interesting contrast is it where in Zestiria, you might recall, one of the very first Hellions we encounter is the goblin type that appears with Hellionized humans in Lady Lake. And how different is that just creepy apparition of a speechless goblin to that very rational goblin with whom we could communicate, whom we just saw in the other cell on the other side of this place? Talk about a radically different perspective. Oh, talk about a man who knows what he's about. I like you being undead too, buddy. It is better than being regular dead. He might be my favorite character so far. I love that way of putting it, Grail, and that's another nice way of thinking about the potential connections between this and Alisha's story, the DLC that most immediately preceded it, right? Because that DLC, more so than the Zestiria main game, was similarly a character study looking closely in an intense and fixated way on Alisha and her psychology. So it's interesting to have that as the most fresh and recent thing in our mind as we then platform into this character study of Velvet.
Dear me, not a word of apology?
I remember that voice from my first playthrough.
What is wrong with you people? There I was, sleeping like a sweet babe, when suddenly, from paradise down to hell! No worse, a grimy prison cell. You see why I'm not feeling well.
And you are?
you asked? I'm thrilled to introduce to you the wise sorceress who travels the 11 seas, who scoffs at the might of dragons! None other than the acclaimed, the illustrious Majigigi Kambilu Dindo Dindo Laroon Do! Magilu for short.
Magilu?
No, Ma, like Soggy Shoe or Doggy Doo, or call me any of those things and I'll turn you into a froggy stew!
Nice.
I suppose you'll never understand. People can be so tragically unlearned. But hey, like I care.
Oh no! Anyway.
I can't believe she snuck up on me. Who is she?
This is no ordinary prison. We must be cautious. Trust no one. She said she's a powerful witch.
Did she have a Moloch tethered?
No, I didn't sense Malakim around her. She's an ordinary human, I think.
Then she's an ordinary magician, not a witch. If she tries to trick me again, I'll crush her and be done with it.
You know what this is reminding me a little bit of, actually? Because for those who are watching and don't know, I've been on a bit of a JRPG binge for the last year because my friend and colleague Dan Hughes and I lectured about this time last year at PAX West about the Final Fantasy VII series. And so to prepare for that, we played through, in quick succession, all of the games in the Final Fantasy VII series, from the original all the way through all the spin-offs and movies, up through and including Intermake and Intermission. And then after that, I went through all the Xenoblade stuff and then kind of very naturally platformed into Tales after that, as one does in terms of the stuff that I'm doing for content and research. And with that fresh in my mind, which it wasn't the first time I played this, the whole kind of aesthetic of this game and the focus on a single character and the way it kind of prevents a more aggressively anti-heroic protagonist than what you see in a lot of the other companion games, it's kind of reading like Dirge of Cerberus to me a little bit, in a way that I really like. I know Dirge of Cerberus gets a lot of mixed reviews, not least of which because of its gameplay, but I really enjoyed it, all the more so on a replay. And I think this is picking up on a lot of the kind of subversive narrative elements that you get in Dirge of Cerberus with Vincent. Pink Moon Neko, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you see why, we stream and think a little bit different about games, hopefully in a way that you enjoy. If you do enjoy it, really hope to see you back. We do this Tales of Praxis stuff every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we have lots of other content in all sorts of media and modes of presentation and topics on withatterriblefate.com. So hope to see you again. It was such a pleasure having you here in chat. Cheers. Yeah, that's a good point too, Grail. I missed your last message, but especially since we spent so much time talking about the girl group in Alisha's story, it's funny because obviously I remember this game in my head as being kind of the interesting challenge piece of the Tales series for presenting like a single female protagonist as the main focus, which was a pretty cool and I, as Mr. Straight White Man, would say relatively progressive thing for this kind of game. But I think the point you make is a great one, that it's not just Velvet. Like, there are a lot of really well-defined and interesting and compelling female characters that ground the story in this. So I think that'll be really great to keep an eye on. Well, Grail, the Final Fantasy stuff is an undertaking as great as Tales, I would say, and as potentially overwhelming, if not more so. So if you ever find yourself wanting to do that, I have not fully overwhelmed myself with the series, but various subcategories of it I know very well. So I would be happy to be a spirit guide if that's ever anything you're looking for.
more?
Oh,
This one. He's a demon.
Get ready.
I like this track. Remember this?
Neither are you.
True enough.
This fucking guy.
He's strong.
Chips in the blades already. Brittle, these exorcist knives. I've got to reclaim Stormhowl.
Storm out!
Stormhowl? That sword we found?
You found it? Where? Do you have it? Please tell me.
It's in a storage room. Down below.
Down below, you have my thanks.
Goodbye!
He's an odd dude. If things settle down, we'll miss our window. Hurry.
He's very obviously a different character from Raven in Tales of Vesperia, Grail. But I think in my head, especially since I hadn't played Vesperia recently when I played Berseria for the first time, and, you know, they both have kind of similar hair, and you find them both in a prison in the first place, I had them coded in my head as super similar. So it'll be nice to be playing this right after Vesperia and be able to finally disentangle those two characters in my mind's eye. Oh, we're getting more charge abilities for guards like we got in Zestiria. That should be fun. Cool.
Stormhowl. Could that demon be
What is it?
nothing? That demon swordsman was just strange.
Now, Grail, while we're watching this skit, can you remind me, are those skills like the one we just got, things we have to equip, or are they just automatic?
Completely.
We have to
Think
equip
too
them,
much
right?
About it. He's a demon after all.
The prisoners here are all so unusual.
Fantastic. I'm in.
Like I care what a Moloch thinks of me.
I love that. Keep it nice and simple. The other thing that's fun and speaks to the point I was making before this started to happen, because I said how the game focuses on Velvet in isolation and you're not building up a party. And that's funny because we ran into two people where, even if you haven't played this game before, Magilu and the as of yet nameless sword fighter demon we just fought are very clearly coded as future party members, right? So you run into them and you think, oh yeah, we're building a party. It's going to start feeling like a regular JRPG. But instead you just meet them and then they run off in their own separate direction and they don't join the party. So it's like almost a self-consciously anti-JRPG introduction in that regard.
Got the gate to the docks locked down. We can't.
All the bodies. Jesus.
Don't waste my time.
Yeah, I'm interested to evaluate all of the party characters through fresh eyes this time around. I remember really being engaged in Magilu's arc and finding her a very compelling character, and Velvet obviously, but then I won't say too much about the others because we're just not far enough yet. But it'll be, no doubt, fun and plenty to talk about as we keep going. Okay, so basically, more souls you have, more you can combo. That seems intuitive enough. And more combo means fewer openings to get hit. Yeah, so we're already kind of starting to see the contours of the battle system and the themes that got me interested in the thematic content of the gameplay the first time around, namely the idea that between literal button mashing to get different combos, and then also, like we're talking about with the nature of combo bonuses now, where like the gameplay system is very directly reinforcing the idea that the best defense is a strong offense. It has always struck me, as someone who's not that good at the gameplay, so Grail, please add your 2 cents here, but it struck me as kind of rewarding and incentivizing an aggressive style of gameplay in a way that always felt very consistent with the way that Velvet is being characterized as a character who gives in not just to her emotions, but particularly her aggressive and vengeful ones, as we've seen in this sequence since we've skipped forward to the present time of the narrative and she's in this prison. Oh, that is funny about the characters you do and don't find compelling, Grail.
Got the gate to the docks locked down.
So I guess my secret goal will be to try to bring you around on Velvet. I don't even remember how I ended up feeling about her totally, but if you didn't like her the first time, let's try to get you around to have a new perspective on her this time. I think that's a good way to approach it.
We've just about quelled this riot. You won't be getting away.
Quelled. That's a term that very directly echoes what the shepherd and his cohort is doing in Tales of Zestiria. Yeah, even to the point where I feel like I'm doing something wrong if I'm using the guard button. Part of me almost wonders whether that's why they mapped it differently than they did in the other games. Like they wanted it to be less of a focus, so you just have your thumb hanging out on all of the attack buttons and don't even really think about the guarding as an option. Almost reminiscent of the one little wooden shield that you can get in Bloodborne that's just a joke and completely useless. Like, we included defense as an option in this just to show you that you shouldn't be using defense. Really like a bit of a thematic and gameplay follow-up that's similar to Bloodborne following up to Dark Souls, I guess, the more we're talking about it. This really is the Bloodborne of Dark Souls and Namco JRPGs. We're so smart.
The path has collapsed. That rope won't do any good here.
God, the sound effect for when she summons that claw is so unsettling.
Seriously going to try it, are you?
He fell further than this back at the shrine.
Things we learned and will never forget, Grail. These are absolutely facts. The benefits of not being quite human anymore, am I right?
You're strong. I would almost think you made an oath. It's a ritual.
More
with
connective
no special
tissue.
power, if the oath taker abides by certain restrictions. The harsher the restrictions, the greater the power one may command. In a very real sense, an oath is a sort of
Curse, right? Well, guess what? You're the ones who did this to me.
That's the dream, Grail. That's all any of us is looking for out of life. Oh, the seamless dialogue transition from cutscene into area navigation. I dig that. So fluid. That is an interesting motif, too. I'll be interested to see where they go with this. The idea that it seems like Velvet has taken an oath because, in a sense, like, she was forced into that sort of aesthetic and restrictive life that an oath compels you to live by, even though it wasn't by her choice. Like, she's been holed up in a prison in pure survival mode for 3 years and purely fed by a single sense of determination to get her revenge on Artorias. So there's an interesting question, I think, that we can pose and think about as we go on here of what is the difference between that kind of singular drive and commitment and an actual oath within the framework of this world that has a very clear and well-defined definition for what an oath is and the kind of powers that it gives you. Maybe it's a distinction without a difference, or maybe it'll end up illuminating part of what sets Velvet apart from the rest of the world. It is a little lonely without Rose once you get used to her, isn't it, Grail? We have our guest Malik, Ceres, but she just seems a little more judgmental and aloof than Rose ever did. Oh, don't worry, Grail. It's a JRPG. I'm sure they'll provide us with someone eventually. And then we'll eventually come around on them and have things to say to defend their role in the game. That's the natural order of things, don't you know? All right, onward.
This way leads to the main entrance.
If they know you're here, they'll have found your ship by now. The guards expect us at the rear, not the front.
What is that emoji that you sent? I can't figure out what that is.
We're almost there.
That's enough.
Oscar, I had no idea an Exorcist Praetor had been assigned to this.
Is that? That's the same VA that voices.
Me, Ceres. Aiding criminals now, are you?
Oh, maybe not.
Did Lord Artorias request this?
I'm gonna have to look that up. I was gonna say he sounds like the VA who voices Jude in Xillia and Flynn in Vesperia, but now I'm not quite sure if it's him or someone who's just also putting on a similarly regal knight's voice. It's not him.
No, I'm acting on my own.
A mullet with free will?
Sounds super similar, though.
I sense someone's strings guiding me.
Hold on. A Praetor is far more dangerous than an orderly.
Bummer.
All out of subterfuge. And besides, if we can't overpower this one, our end goal was hopeless to begin with.
You're a demon, but still a lady. So I'll show you due respect. I am Oscar Dragonia, Praetor of the Abbey of the Holy Midgand Empire.
Do I want to ask which game you're talking about, or do I not want to spoil it for myself, Grail?
All right. Graceless demon it is then. Lord Artorias himself taught me the ways of purification. How will you fare against them?
Out of my way!
Ah, got it. I have to look up if they use his voice in other Tales games also, because it sounds so familiar to me. I'm almost thinking it's like he voices someone else, and it's not just that he sounds similar to the fellow who voices Jude. I'm quickly remembering how much of this gameplay is picking up those souls when they're dropped on the battlefield.
You're skilled. I will have to expend a Moloch or two for this.
What Final Fantasy comparison are you talking about, Grail? Like the treatment of the Malik here in comparison to what in Final Fantasy?
More of your vaunted reason.
Are you comparing the Malakim with the Dominance from 16? Is that what you mean? Oh, sure, that makes sense, the way they enslave people with magical aptitude. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's interesting. Ooh. Even that level of gore is pretty visceral compared with what we've been used to in previous Tales games.
Please, consume me.
I'm not about to.
My form is bound by an oath whose price is my life.
No, that's got to be a Drake or another kind of baby dragon Grail. Come on, there was a whole discussion about how those are distinct types with different abilities in Zestiria.
The time has come to pay. Feeding on my form will grant you strength, the strength to press forward. I ask only that you devour me.
Why?
A flame burns in my heart too. A flame I cannot quench no matter how hard I try. Just like you, Velvet.
Oh.
This was Laffy's. That is why I cannot abide it. This frozen world. This frozen people.
It's another symbol, the comb.
I'm just that stubborn of a woman.
I think that's 4 if we're trying to keep score. 4 symbols so far.
Hurry. Before my life fades. Do it now.
I offer no apology or thanks.
I need neither. Our wishes are one and the same. I treasured those days when you and I and Arthur were together.
That's got to be a Malik who was born of Celica, her sister, right? Wow. And such a meaningful and moving death so early in a game. I feel like that is not easy to pull off. But I definitely feel this one. I think one interesting thing that they do too, like, because I was wondering, man, how do they manage to do something that is so arrestingly emotional and get away with all of this really intense stuff so early in the game, with, you know, Velvet being so violent and Ceres being brutalized in that way, and just all the bodies littering the floor. And I think there's an interesting sense in which, you know, the jump from the sequence when Velvet is 16 and you see her, you know, wrestling with normal teenage stuff of, you know, not being able to control her emotions and thinking about, you know, boys and stuff like that, and Artorias kind of gently chiding her as Arthur about not being able to keep her inner life in check, and then to have her undergo that betrayal that she doesn't understand and be in prison for 3 years, and then to jump 3 years ahead, where that entire time that we don't get to see, Velvet has just been sitting there and killing and feeding and cultivating her rage and hatred. Like, there's an interesting sense in which we're set up through that beginning sequence to then kind of be prepared, but also shocked by the jump that then shows us after the fact a super emotional Velvet who has purely been able to keep going by further stoking her emotions and just unbridled bloodlust for 3 years. So it's almost inevitable that the game is going to jump to these heights of emotions immediately, given the context it's set up for itself. That's a good question, Grail. I think probably no, because you wouldn't understand the origin of Celis in the same way, or how she was related to the stuff that you saw in that opening sequence. So yeah, I think that's actually a good example already of a moment in the game that really its pathos depends on what you understand from a game outside of this one. Because, yeah, I probably didn't appreciate it in the same way the first time I played it when I didn't have Zestiria fresh in my head. Break souls! This really is the Dark Souls of Break Souls, isn't it? So you trade souls with your target. But yeah, they're like almost quasi-burst arts. I remember this. This was a big part of the gameplay. There you go, Grail. We got there. God, we're just so smart. People who know us are so lucky. I should heal. God, what is the... You press the center button to pull up the menu. That is so unintuitive to me. I'm used to pressing triangle. Oh, thank you, Grail. It's a good reminder. I hadn't clocked that. That sounds like a challenge, Grail, and I am more than happy to accept it. But don't set your expectations too high.
Apologies, but I can't let a nasty demon like you roam freely now, can I?
Velvet. That's my name. You can give Artorias my revenge.
And this is my leitmotif.
My name is Velvet Crow, and I will devour demon, Moloch, and exorcist alike. am a monster! I am a Therian!
Oh my god. Wow! What a way to start a JRPG! Your avatar proclaims herself a monster and sets a hero character on fire.
Oh! Finally someplace that might not be a death trap. When we tumbled from the tower, I thought, this is it, Magilu. This is the end!
It would have been less risky if you hadn't suddenly appeared and jumped on my back. Oh, hey, it's you. It's thanks to you that Stormhowl is back in my care.
You solved it, Grail.
Rokurodon gets it. At your service. This blade is my life.
Berseria is just the Dragon Ball of Tales JRPGs.
I vow to repay.
Yes, she's a peach and a model citizen. Can we get our move on? I think they're just about done massacring the rioters.
The docks are just ahead. Give me a hand.
So lighthearted about the massacre that's just taken place. I feel like these tutorials are also more efficient at teaching you the little useful tricks to make the combat system work for you. Whereas with Zestiria, I felt so overwhelmed with tutorials that it was harder for me to see the forest for the trees. Like, these seem like simple ways to use the technique in battle that I could actually implement reasonably efficiently. Yep, true enough, Grail. True enough.
Guess the weather's feeling as crummy as I am.
Careful. Sea's looking mighty choppy.
Is Magilu already the absolute queen of
I
melodrama?
do know the difference between a sail and a rudder.
I'll take what I can get. Do what you can.
You're leaving without a proper crew?
Very well, then. I certainly owe you this much at least.
Brave words. But 10 minutes in this storm and you'll lose all sense of direction.
No, we won't. Ships have compasses for...
Yeah, maybe that's why I like her character. I empathize with it so deeply.
So it's rot in a jail cell or rot in a fish tummy. Well, guess it's your lucky day, fishies.
I'm coming for you, Artorias.
I don't know, Grail. I think that's part of why this game resonates with so many fans. Like, especially after playing so many JRPGs where, yeah, every character is individual and quirky, but at the end of the day, they're heroic and, you know, role models in one sense or another. I feel like there's something almost cathartic about being able to identify with characters who are sort of, let's say, less obviously morally aligned with things that you might want to aspire to. It makes them more realistic in some sense, I would say, at least. Yeah, exactly. But that's relatable, right? Hopefully people besides you and I feel like that's relatable. Otherwise, we are in trouble, you and I.
Laffy said... A Moloch. Ah! Stay back!
Don't you fucking touch this kid I just met. He's all I care about now. Don't act like there's anyone who can't relate to that, Grail.
Sorry. If I had a weapon, I would have helped. I promise.
You're wearing one.
Oh, nah, I can't use this. Sorry, long story.
And the child?
The little brat? Scampered off somewhere.
You ought to be scampering off yourselves.
My debt is not yet repaid. Until it is, I will not leave your side.
We are bound, you and I.
Off without knowing from whence I'm scampering. We're lost, stranded shipwreck survivors. No?
Well, then I expect this might come in handy.
A map? Was that left by the child?
Looks to me like we're in Northgand.
Northgand? Then if we're to reach the capital in Midgand, we've no choice but to patch up our ship.
I am definitely excited for that point then, Grail. I'm not hating her so far, though. Button mashing though it is, it feels very fluid. And something that I can execute decently well.
Somewhere nicer, somewhere with soup to warm the body, tales to warm the heart.
There's a city called Helavis nearby. I can't promise they're much for conversation, but we'll find food and a ship right there.
Oh, that's new. The character who has the last laugh gets more experience. That kind of feels consonant with the themes of the game so far, where if the characters are more aggressively individualistic, it's almost more competitive to see which one is going to outperform the rest in each battle. Damn, Grail. Sometimes it really do be like that. When you're leveled out of the weapon you want to use. You go ice caps. I see a save point. Well, I feel like this is a fine place to wrap up the intro, as we've experienced the core betrayal, watched Velvet harden into a revenge-driven young lady, and made our escape from Prison Island. Oh, sorry, I wasn't trying to make a Xenoblade reference. Sometimes they just come out. Jokes aside.
Velvet, you know that kid? I thought I heard you call him by name.
No, I don't know any Malakim. Not anymore.
Anymore?
What?
Well,
Another thing speaking to that comment, Grail, that's unexpectedly resonant with Alisha's story, right? So remember, we were talking about kind of the value of resentment and sort of negative or antagonistic relationships as they're foregrounded in that. So you can also kind of think of it as a prequel to a lot of what they're doing in this game in that regard.
I suppose.
Come on, it's not funny if you agree with me.
You think?
So this is how escaped prisoners behave.
All right, well, it's safe to say I am already feeling the delight at the way the story is unfolding and how it's challenging a lot of what, even given the few Tales games that we've played on stream, we've come to expect from a typical Tales game. I'm dialed in. I can't wait to see what happens next. I know we have quite a few twists and turns ahead of us, not just as we uncover what this story is about and what is this trying to say, but also as we uncover more of the connective tissue with Zestiria. What am I trying to say relative to that game? What it might be trying to say on its own. So we've got a long and interesting and fruitful journey ahead of us. There's no doubt about that. Well, you know, it's early days, Grail. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that. We already got someone who was bloodied to death and had to be devoured inside of the first stream. So, I mean, I think that's a decent place to start as much as anywhere. It's been such a pleasure. I'm looking forward to where this goes. Gonna almost certainly wrap up the Zestiria this weekend too. So I'm sure I'll have some thoughts to share throughout the next week about that. Have some writing to turn to after that. So it's going to be good times ahead for the month of August, and then rolling into our lecture at PAX West right after that on Labor Day weekend about whether Pokemon's a JRPG, which will draw a lot on this sort of thinking about Pokemon, and also a lot on what we've been thinking with regard to the Tales series. So excited for that, excited for the next bit of the stream, excited for this real life JRPG party that we're rounding up to go on these adventures together. So thank you all for that. It's been a delightful way to spend a Friday night for me. I hope you all game well over the weekend. I had fun too, Grail. I'll shout out the other folks who were in the stream too, because it really was so nice to have a multitude of voices and perspectives, just like is so consistent across these Tales games. Pink Moon Neko, it was great to see you. Thank you for keeping me honest about the skits. Hope to see you back next time. Itchy, thanks so much for stopping in on your lunch break. If you're able to make it back, it's always a pleasure to talk Tales with you. It was great to see a repeat customer. Hopefully that means the stream is showing you something that you value and find rewarding. That's all we aim for. Newtonia, it was nice to see you for the first time in a while. Sorry it wasn't more of a stream for talking straight philosophy, but especially if you find yourself interested in the storytelling of games, that's really the particular niche of philosophy that With a Terrible Fate is all about, and that's always what we're doing on these. So definitely welcome you back with a special focus on that. We'll have lots more on the way. Yeah, Grail, you have a great one as well. Everyone have a great night. I'm Aaron Suduko, the host of Tales of Praxis and the founder of With a Terrible Fate. Lots more new content coming your way soon, and we will pick up right here on this playthrough of Tales of Berseria, 7 p.m. Eastern, this coming Monday. So don't be late. We'll have plenty to talk about and a lot more events and content to dig into. Until then, my friends, next time.